Have you ever wondered why a $3,000 professional camera lens is the size of a coffee thermos, but your 8mm thin smartphone can still take a shot that looks almost as good? It seems like magic. But here is the dirty secret of mobile photography. Physically, your smartphone camera is trapped. It is running up against immovable laws of optical physics. The sensors are squeezed, the apertures are locked, and the physical glass simply cannot get any bigger without making your phone as thick as a brick. So, if the hardware is completely boxed in, how did mobile photos get light years better over the last decade? Today, let's break down how smartphone image sensors actually work, the brilliant ways engineers redesign different types of sensors to cheat those physical bottlenecks, and how artificial intelligence pulled off the greatest optical magic trick in modern history. Let's start at the absolute foundation. What actually happens inside your phone when you tap the shutter button? At its core, a camera sensor is an electronic net designed to catch light. Think of the sensor surface as a massive grid made of millions of microscopic buckets called photodiodes. When you take a picture, light photons stream through the lens and land inside these buckets. The sensor converts those photons into an electrical charge, measures how much light landed in every single bucket, and converts that data into the digital image you see on your screen. If you have a 50-megapixel sensor, that means your phone has 50 million tiny buckets crammed onto a piece of silicon, roughly the size of your fingernail. And right there, we hit our very first physical problem: bucket size. In the world of photography, bigger sensors almost always mean better photos. A massive sensor on a professional camera has huge physical buckets. They can gather an ocean of light effortlessly, producing clean pictures with virtually no noise, even in the dark. So why don't smartphone makers just put a full-sized camera sensor inside your phone? It comes down to a fundamental rule of engineering called the z-axis, the physical thickness of your device. To focus light onto a larger sensor, the glass lens elements must physically sit further away from that sensor. If a manufacturer tried to put a true, professional-sized sensor inside a phone, the lens stack would have to stick out 2 inches from the back of the device. Because space is so limited, those 50 million buckets are microscopic. In bright sunlight, they work fine. But the second you step indoors, they starve for light, producing heavy digital static. You might think, why not just open up the camera lens wider to let in more light? That brings us to our second bottleneck, the aperture. The aperture is the physical hole inside the lens. Professional cameras have variable apertures, but smartphones are trapped using fixed, wide-open holes. They physically cannot make the hole any wider without the glass getting too thick, which would cause the light rays to hit the sensor at harsh angles and blur the edges of your photos. They cannot make the sensor wider, and they cannot make the hole bigger. So, how did they fix it? They redesigned the inside of the sensor itself. To survive these physical traps, engineers had to get incredibly creative with how they built those microscopic buckets. Over the years, the industry evolved through 4 distinct types of sensor architectures. First, we had standard front-side illuminated CMOS sensors. In the early days of smartphones, these sensors were built like a sandwich, but the microscopic metal wiring they carried the electrical signals sat directly on top of the light-gathering buckets. It was like putting a thick screen door over a solar panel. The wiring physically blocked a large portion of the incoming light. These sensors were cheap, but terrible in the dark. To fix this, engineers created the backside illuminated sensor, or BSI. It was a brilliantly simple idea. They flipped the wafer upside down. They moved all the wiring to the back, underneath the buckets. Suddenly, the light could hit the photodiodes directly with zero obstruction. This architectural flip drastically improved low-light photography and became the absolute standard for modern mobile cameras. But as the megapixel wars heated up, companies wanted 50 or even 200 megapixels. Fitting that many buckets onto a tiny chip made each bucket so small that they began starving for light all over again, even with the wiring moved out of the way. This led to the quad-Bayer, or pixel binning sensor. Instead of treating every pixel individually, this sensor mathematically groups 4, or sometimes 9, microscopic pixels together into a single cluster. In bright daylight, you get a highly detailed, massive megapixel shot. But in the dark, the sensor merges those tiny buckets together to act like one giant, super-sensitive bucket, sucking in light and reducing static. Finally, we arrive at the absolute bleeding edge of modern engineering: the stacked CMOS and dual-layer transistor sensors. Found in the newest flagship phones, these sensors take the backside illuminated concept and completely separate it. Engineers place the light-gathering photodiodes on one floor of silicon, and all the processing transistors on a completely separate basement floor, stacking them perfectly on top of each other. This allows the light buckets to be much deeper, holding twice as much light, while the dedicated bottom layer processes billions of calculations instantly. But here is the most crucial reason engineers are fighting so hard to upgrade this physical hardware: thermal survival. For years, smartphones relied almost entirely on software to fix bad lighting. If you took a picture of a bright window from inside a dark room, a tiny standard sensor couldn't handle the contrast. To save the shot, the processor had to rapid-fire 15 different photos, mathematically align every pixel, and stitch them together to fake a balanced image. That multi-frame math requires a massive amount of electricity. When your processor runs at maximum capacity to stitch all those frames together, it generates a tremendous amount of heat. If you try to do that 60 times a second while recording high-resolution video, your phone will overheat, throttle its performance, and eventually shut down the camera app to protect itself. This is where the newest sensor architectures step in to save the day. Technologies like dual conversion gain and lateral overflow integration capacitors, or LOFIC, completely change the game. Instead of relying on the processor to take multiple photos, these advanced sensors have extra overflow buckets built right into the silicon. If a bucket taking a photo of a bright sky gets completely full, instead of blowing out to pure white and losing the data, the electricity safely spills over into a secondary capacitor bucket. In a single fraction of a second exposure, the physical hardware captures both the deepest shadows and the blinding highlights perfectly. Because the sensor captures a flawless, high dynamic range image natively in the hardware, the phone's processor does not have to panic. It doesn't have to rapidly fire 15 frames. It doesn't have to run heavy alignment math, and it doesn't have to mathematically guess what the lighting should look like. The physical sensor does the heavy lifting, allowing the artificial intelligence and the main processor to sit back, relax, and most importantly, run incredibly cool. Capturing light safely is only half the battle. The camera also has to know exactly what to look at in the first place. For years, smartphones used contrast detection, where the lens slowly pulsed back and forth, guessing until the edges of the subject looked sharp. It was slow and constantly hunted for focus, especially in dim lighting. To fix this, engineers fundamentally changed the sensor architecture again by inventing dual pixel phase detection autofocus. Instead of a single bucket gathering light, they split millions of those microscopic pixels perfectly in half. The left half and the right half of the pixel capture the incoming light independently, effectively giving the sensor binocular vision, just like human eyes. By comparing the slight phase difference between the light hitting the left and right halves, the sensor can instantly calculate the exact physical distance of the subject, snapping the lens into perfect focus in milliseconds. But what if you are standing in a pitch-black room? If there is no ambient light, phase detection is completely blind. To bypass the physics of visible light entirely, manufacturers added time-of-flight and LiDAR scanners. These are dedicated infrared laser modules sitting right next to your main camera. When you open your camera in the dark, the LiDAR scanner fires a dense grid of invisible laser pulses into the room. The sensor measures the exact fraction of a nanosecond it takes for those lasers to bounce off the subject and return to the phone. Because the speed of light is a constant, the phone instantly calculates a flawless, real-time, three-dimensional map of the entire space. It doesn't matter if it is completely black. The LiDAR scanner tells the camera lens exactly where to lock focus. Because these different sensor architectures cost drastically different amounts to manufacture, the camera experience completely shifts depending on what you pay for your phone. In budget devices, around $100 to $250, you are getting older, smaller BSI sensors with basic plastic lenses. They lack hardware stabilization, and because the sensors are tiny, they struggle heavily with indoor noise and motion blur. In mid-range devices, ranging from $300 to $600, manufacturers heavily rely on those quad-Bayer pixel binning sensors. They offer fantastic daylight sharpness and respectable night shots, but the companies save money by using smaller, cheaper sensors for the ultrawide and zoom lenses. When you step up to an $800 flagship device, you are paying for those massive, dual-layer stacked sensors paired with LiDAR. They natively capture extreme dynamic range, meaning you can take a photo with a bright sun in the background and a subject in deep shadow, and the sensor perfectly balances both without missing a beat. They also process data so fast that your phone can record heavy 4K video without thermal throttling. But here is the final plot twist. Even with stacked silicon, pixel binning, and laser autofocus, the physical hardware is still trapped by the thickness of your pocket. The monumental leap in image quality over the last decade wasn't just because of the sensors. It happened because smartphones stopped treating photography as a hardware problem and turned it into a software problem. Today, a single photo does not exist on your smartphone. The second you open your camera app, your phone begins constantly buffering a continuous loop of raw images. When you tap the shutter button, the processor instantly grabs up to 30 different frames, aligns them mathematically, averages out the noise, and crushes them together into a single, pristine image. Your phone uses dedicated neural processing units to slice the image into distinct semantic layers. It instantly recognizes human skin, green grass, and bright sky, applying custom exposure and noise reduction algorithms to each layer independently in a fraction of a second. When you see a stunning portrait or a crisp night shot from a smartphone, you aren't just looking at what the physical glass captured. You are looking at an image that was captured, aligned, cleaned, and enhanced by a pocket-sized supercomputer. The physical hardware on a smartphone will always be limited by the thickness of your device. But by continuously redesigning the silicon architecture, introducing laser scanning, and combining it all with raw computational AI power, mobile cameras have proven that you don't always need a bigger bucket, as long as you have a smart enough processor handling the rain. If you enjoyed this deep dive into camera physics, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below, letting me know what technical topic you want broken down next. I'm Sal, signing off from our studio, and I'll see you in the next video.